Welcome to Nice and Blunt. My name is Adam Riancho, and it's time for another rankings video. We're getting back to the running back position where I'm talking best handcuff running backs in the league. These are my top 40 running backs for 2024. A reminder of the list here on the screen inside my top 30. I've gone over all of these players in the past in previous videos, so you can check that out on my channel. But at the top of this tier, we have Jaylen Warren at RB 30. Let's move forward with number 31, where I have Gus Edwards of the LA Chargers. At 29 years old, Gus is not an ideal RB1, but he is coming off a 13 touchdown season. He has experience in the Greg Roman offense dating back to Baltimore earlier on in both of their careers, and all signs are pointing to the Chargers being a run-heavy offense with a bolstered offensive line. The drafting of Joe Alt is a very encouraging sign for the fantasy production in the Chargers backfield this season. So I think Gus would be the safest bet to lead all of the players in fantasy points in the Chargers backfield, but he did get injured earlier this offseason. Reports indicate he should be 100% healthy for training camp. So that's why I still have him here this high, and I do think he is the most valuable running back to own in LA. But there's a chance that he loses this job. It's not guaranteed, but last year was a career best season. He put up 990 total yards, 12 receptions, and 13 touchdowns in 17 games, but he still only averaged 10.8 half PPR points per game. That's not like elite. So touchdowns are critical for his success, but this Chargers backfield remains ambiguous. And if you told me that somebody else is the running back to own, I would not be shocked at all. But maybe it's J.K. Dobbins. I don't really want to bet on that coming off an Achilles injury. Maybe it's the rookie Kimani Vidal, who had an excellent season last year playing for Troy, but he's a 6th round pick. I'm not convinced that works out. And maybe, just maybe, Isaiah Spiller, former 4th rounder, actually makes something of his career. That feels like a long shot. So this rank is probably going to change. I really want to keep an eye out on the training camp news over the coming weeks. But at the moment, I think Gus is the guy you want, and that's why I have him here at the top. But we might have a Chargers running back be the number 1 pickup off of waivers in week 2. It's going to be a lot more obvious who you want when they actually play some games. So for now, I have him here in this handcuff backup tier, but maybe he's a top 25 option. Maybe he's not even a top 40 option. We will see. Moving forward, though, I have Ezekiel Elliott, who is technically not a backup now that he's back in Dallas, but he's definitely in a committee alongside Rico Dowdle. I think the two of them will be splitting touches for sure, and it's a question of how much will it favor Zeke, because last year when he was the workhorse in the Patriots offense when Ramondre got hurt, Zeke was amazing. He averaged 13.3 points per game in 6 games as the starter. He saw 20 touches per game, 5.2 receptions per game, 77 yards per game, only 3 yards per carry. He was very inefficient, but he also scored 3 touchdowns, and that was very valuable in the fantasy playoffs. It helped me win a fantasy championship last season. But all of his opponents were a lot more banged up than he was. He was not getting a ton of touches earlier in the season. If we look at his first 11 games as Stevenson's backup, he only averaged 6.5 points per game on 10.5 touches per game. It was basically cut in half. His efficiency didn't change too much as the volume doubled. So that's where I'm not excited about Zeke. He's definitely in the later stages of his career. He reunites with Dallas at age 29. It is his 9th career season, and he also has a total 2,421 career touches under his belt. If you told me he had a season-ending injury early on this season, I would not be shocked. But he could stay healthy. He's actually never missed more than 2 games in any season due to injury. If we look at the suspension, that was the biggest chunk of time he's ever missed. So he might be severely underrated. His ADP on Underdog is running back 37 with an ADP of 121 overall, and he actually has been quickly rising over the last week or so. His only competition is Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn, but Vaughn feels like an afterthought. And there are 307 vacated touches in this offense from Tony Pollard, who moved on to Tennessee in free agency. But I can't imagine all of them are going to Zeke. It's definitely going to be a pretty significant split with Rico Dowdle. Maybe Dowdle is actually the guy you want here, but I think Zeke's historic efficiency on the goal line, especially in Dallas, is what gives him the edge. He's the player I want to target of the two. But Mike McCarthy's offense very rarely offers like elite fantasy production at the running back spot. Back in Green Bay, nobody was ever really a good fantasy option. And last year, Tony Pollard only scored 6 touchdowns. And in 2022, the Dallas running backs did combine for 26 total touchdowns, but that was with Kellen Moore as the OC. I'm not really reading into those stats too much. So if Zeke stays healthy, he will most likely outperform his ADP. I think that's why he's a good target. But given his age and experience, it does come with a decent amount of risk. It will be a committee. And if you want to invest in Dowdle or just grab both of them and see who wins out for this job, I don't think that's a bad strategy either. So maybe Dowdle is really the guy. Maybe Zeke is just a mentor for him. But because he's familiar in this offense, he's played for Mike McCarthy, he's played with Dak plenty of times, I think betting on him is high upside, low risk. I do still prefer Jerome Ford at a similar price, but Zeke is definitely a good value as one of the last starting NFL running backs you can draft. I think he should be drafted a full round sooner. I'm not afraid to reach on him if I need running backs in the 10th round. But moving forward, I have Tony Pollard, the player he's replacing in now Tennessee. And Pollard is okay, but I don't think he's that much different than Tyjae Spears, who I have one spot behind him. But let's focus on Pollard here. He was expected to take a leap in 2023 after Zeke left the Cowboys, but despite seeing a career high in touches, 307, he actually put up 62 fewer yards than he did in 2022, and that was only 232 touches. He also scored half the touchdowns, only 6 compared to 12 the year prior, and his efficiency took a drastic hit. He posted only 4 yards per carry last season after running for 5.1 yards per carry through his first 4 years in his career. His yards per catch also fell from an average 8.3 in his first 4 seasons down to 5.7 last year, and it feels like Pollard is really just suited as the change of pace guy in a heavy committee. So that's what he's looking at this season. Now that he's in Tennessee, he does have a good backup to compete with, but he's still supposedly the number one option. It is worth noting, though, that last year he played all 17 games, averaging 11.5 points per game, and was coming off a broken leg injury that he suffered in January, that playoff loss to the Niners earlier that year. So not a lot of healing time on that broken leg, and he did play every single game. He also posted a career high in receptions with 55, but his new teammate Tyjae Spears also caught 52 receptions as a rookie, and I think that number of catches will be coming down for Pollard. So he might bounce back, but the Titans just project as a bottom 10 offense this year, along with a bottom 10 offensive line. There's a lot of red flags that make me discouraged, and according to reports, the coaches are talking like this is a 50-50 split, a 1A, 1B situation, and the only thing that makes you prefer Pollard over Spears is that this new coaching staff that didn't draft Spears gave Pollard an $8 million per year contract. They are definitely invested in him and have plans for him in the future. So he's going to get volume. He's trying to replace Derrick Henry. There are 308 available touches in this offense following Derrick Henry's departure. But with an ADP of running back 29, pick 100 overall, I think Pollard is overpriced. I almost never draft him. He's one of my least drafted players, and whenever I do it, I begrudgingly hit the button because he fell to me like 12 plus picks, and I'm like, fine, I guess I'll take Pollard. There aren't that many great options at running back at that point, but I definitely prefer guys who are going later, like Brian Robinson, as well as Jerome Ford, Zeke, and Gus. So even then, I pass on Pollard a lot when he falls, and if I am targeting one of the two Titans running backs, it would be Tyjae Spears because his price is cheaper. Speaking of Spears, I have ranked him one spot lower, back-to-back with Pollard here at RB33, and the biggest reason for optimism is that there are over 300 touches available in Tennessee with no Derrick Henry. So there's definitely opportunity, but the new regime did not draft him, and they also gave Pollard that contract, like I mentioned, but they do speak highly of him. They claim it's going to be a 1A, 1B rotation, and that means the hot hand in any given game is probably going to win out, and a bye in week 5 is the only reason to think that maybe, just maybe, if Spears looks way better than Pollard in the first month, in week 5 during the bye, they readjust and now all of a sudden put Tyjae atop the depth chart. But even in that scenario, I think at best it would be a 60-40 split, and that's not that good behind a bad offensive line in an offense projected to score very few points. So I'm not excited. I do think he's going to catch the most passes in this backfield, and that's what gives him some PPR upside. But I do think Pollard probably sees a little bit more volume overall, and unless one of these players gets hurt, I don't think you're ever seeing weekly top 25 production unless it's a truly elite matchup and they find their way into the end zone. So I don't think it's going to be a good investment. I think it's going to be a big headache deciding whether or not to bench or start them. And I think most often you're going to want to keep them on the bench instead of in your starting lineup. So I want to pass on both Titans running backs. Tyjae goes off the board as RB31, pick 107 overall. It's a little more justified, but still I think there's better options going later, and I also pass on him quite a bit. So I'm just going to not target either of the Titans running backs unless I can get them at a tremendous discount. I think it's worth pivoting. I would much rather draft Brandon Cooks instead of either of them, and Cooks has an ADP later at pick 113. So that's how I feel about the Titans backfield. Not one I want. And these next two options are also some starters that I just don't want to draft at all. RB35, I have Devin Singletary of the New York Giants, and I am simply not targeting a single New York Giant this season. I'm far lower on Malik Neighbors than consensus as well, and Singletary is almost entirely off my board with this ranking. So I don't recommend him on your team at all. His ADP is running back 32, but at pick 109, it's a pretty expensive investment in my opinion. I would much rather grab a quarterback or receiver like Brandon Cooks, Zeke, Jerome Ford, even Gus Edwards, I think are way safer picks. But I understand that Saquon leaving does open 288 touches only in 14 games, so probably more than 300 touches over the course of a season. I am also aware that Singletary knows this Brian Daboll system from his days in Buffalo together, as well as the fact that the only competition in this backfield would be 5th-round rookie Tyrone Tracy. But I just don't want him. I'm not a believer in the Giants. I see very minimal touchdown production, and I just think he's overpriced at the round 9-10 turn. It's not a value, in my opinion. So that's why I pass, but I will mention last year he was productive when given the chance. In 10 games as the starter in Houston, he averaged 12.2 points per game on 19 touches per game, 2.3 receptions per game, 4.3 yards per carry, 87 total yards per game, and also scored 4 touchdowns. But I kind of feel like 4 touchdowns is the max across a full 17-game season this year in New York. It's just not the same offense. There's nowhere near as much upside. I have no faith in Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones also runs it himself. There will be another player to split carries with alongside him. So that's why I just don't want him. Maybe the volume repeats and I look too low on him, but even then I think that touchdown production just won't ever give him a solid ceiling, and when it does happen, it's going to be super matchup dependent. Maybe you can predict it, but more often than not, I think he's a desperate flex play option, not a good top 25 running back. So that's why I am not interested. There's really no chance, I think, for me to rank him top 25 unless there's like 6 teams on bye, and it's a great matchup. So Devin Singletary is on my do not draft list. I do not recommend taking him. I also have no faith in Javonte Williams, my running back 36 this season, and 2024 feels like a make or break year for Javonte. It's the final year of his rookie contract, and last year in his first year with Sean Payton, he did play 16 games coming off an ACL injury, but he only averaged 9.6 points per game. He was getting 16.5 touches per game, 2.9 receptions per game, 63 yards per game on 3.6 yards per carry. That's not efficient at all. And he also scored 5 touchdowns. I feel like all of those numbers are coming down this season. He split touches with Jaleel McLaughlin and Samaje Perine. And despite Perine being a likely cut candidate, there is a recent news article that suggests Javonte and Samaje Perine are fighting for the same roster spot. I would be shocked if they cut Javonte, but the fact that it's between Javonte and Perine is, I think, all I need to know to completely remove him from my board. The Broncos also drafted Audric Estime in the 5th round, as well as brought in undrafted free agent Blake Watson. And Estime is pretty slow. He runs a 4.7 140, but he's also 5'11", 221 pounds, and could easily profile as the goal line back this season. Meanwhile, Blake Watson is underrated. He put up 1,600 plus yards, 53 catches, and scored 17 touchdowns in 13 games for Memphis last year as a 5th-year senior, as well as the fact that Jaleel McLaughlin was hyper efficient. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry, albeit on limited touches last year. So all of these other players are guys that Sean Payton brought in. Meanwhile, Javonte is from a former regime, and there's really nothing that ties him long-term to the franchise. So I've been a fan of him in the past, but I just think the Denver backfield is too crowded to invest in him again. He's another year removed from the ACL injury, so maybe I'm underestimating his bounce back, but I think he needs to play his ass off in order to maintain the starting job. And if it doesn't keep up every single week, then his role is just going to keep fading more and more as the weeks go by. And I think by the time we hit the back half of the season, by the time it's Thanksgiving, he could have a completely non-existent role in this backfield. So perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps he excels under the pressure, but it's just so unlikely in my view that he actually sees more volume than last year, where he was really inefficient and almost never scored touchdowns. So I'm avoiding him like the plague in drafts. His ADP has quickly been dropping lately, and he now goes off the board as RB34, pick 115 overall. That's about 12 picks lower than just a month ago. I think he's still too expensive. I'd much rather draft Zeke or Jerome Ford a full round later. I might consider a round 13 pick on Jaleel McLaughlin just for the PPR value, but I'm much more likely to grab a round 13 gamble on Audric Estime and hope that he has the goal line role in this offense. But overall, I don't think I'm really targeting any of them. Maybe Blake Watson is the guy you actually want. But overall, I am warning you, do not draft Javonte Williams. I think you should remove him from your board. He is on my do not draft list this year. Let's move on, though, to the next tier where there's really just contingent value if the starter goes down. These are the true handcuffs that you want to target. Number 37, I have Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals, and in college, he was pretty good. The last 2 straight years, he put up 1,133 total yards in 13 games for Florida State. He also caught 33 receptions, scored 25 total touchdowns as well, and at 6 foot, 216 pounds, runs a 4.39 40. He's got a lot of speed, he's very explosive, and he can serve as the 3-down back if necessary. But I just don't expect that role for him until his second year in the league. However, there's probably going to be about a month this season, at least 3 games, where that is the case, because James Conner is a sure bet to miss time. He has never played a full season in his career, so there will be a few workhorse matchups for Benson. Let's hope that happens at an opportune time for fantasy. But until it does, I'm not expecting more than like a third of the touches max for Benson in Arizona. And if Conner does get hurt once he returns, I think it'll probably be an even like 50-50 split in most likelihood. So that's probably still not going to favor Benson as the RB1 outright. There are some big red flags with drafting Benson. Maybe James Conner never goes down. Maybe he shocks us all and plays an entire 17-game season, never lets up on his job. But I would expect by the time we're in December, Benson will get more and more volume. They probably want to give him a sneak peek of what he's going to have to deal with next season as their clear RB1. So I do think he has good value for the fantasy playoffs. I think he could be a league winner at the end of the year. But if it takes forever for him to claim that role, you could have him stashed on your bench and he's a roster liability where you can never start him and you can also never drop him because you're just waiting for Connor to go down and it doesn't happen. So that's why he might cause you to miss the playoffs. You might really need that waiver pickup, but you might not be able to afford it and you might not be willing to give up on Benson if you draft him at his expensive price. Right now he's going in the 10th round and it's a little bit expensive for my liking, but on Underdog, when the upside at the end of the season is so much more valuable, I do find myself taking him a decent amount. I think it is somewhat justified, but the real league winning potential is if we're looking at like a week 3 James Conner injury where he all of a sudden misses like 2 months and now you get great value from Benson. And then even when Conner comes back after the week 11 bye, you're like, okay, Benson's not giving up this job. He's the guy in this backfield for sure. And Arizona has pivoted, made him the focal point in the backfield. So maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. That's the risk reward equation you have to balance out when you draft Trey Benson, but I do think he's one of the most valuable handcuff running backs, and I do expect at least a month of top 20, top 10 potential value next season. He will be good when he gets the opportunity. It's just not a guarantee. It happens this season. Speaking of league-winning upside in terms of backups, I have Blake Corum as my running back 38. And in the last 2 seasons for Michigan, he's been really good. He's put up over 2,500 total yards. He's also scored 45 total touchdowns, 24 just last season. And Corum is arguably one of the most ready-to-play rookie running backs that we have this year. I'd probably rank him inside my top 12 if he had been drafted by the Chargers and he had that role all to himself. But he was drafted in the 3rd round by the Rams instead, and that means he'll be playing behind a true workhorse running back in Kyren Williams. So Corum is a risky bet straight up. He's not a freak athlete at all. He's listed at 5'8", 205 pounds with only 4.53 speed, kind of average, but he's a very decisive runner. He has good footwork, and I don't think he has a lot of wasted movement when he runs the ball. But Kyren is not the best athlete either. He's a 5th round pick, 5'9", 194 pounds, 4.65 speed. And I do think Corum will be incorporated in his rookie season. The question is how much and how often. I still project Kyren as the lead back, probably a 75-25 split. Probably best case scenario for Corum is like 30% of the touches, and maybe it grows in his favor over time, but that's just not guaranteed. I do think this is Kyren's job to lose. However, if anything were to happen to Kyren and he did miss time, Blake Corum would probably be a top 10 running back immediately. Maybe in a bad matchup, he might not crack the top 10, but he has top 5 upside. He is a league winner if that does happen. There's no one else really behind him on the depth chart, so he will get a lion's share of the touches if Kyren is unavailable. And that's probably going to happen because Williams has missed games not only last season, but also as a rookie when he wasn't seeing the workhorse role. Given his size, I think it probably happens again. I do think there's going to be about 3 or 4 games where Corum does have this job all to himself. So that's a really good benefit of drafting Corum, especially as a handcuff on your roster to Kyren Williams. You know for a fact when you have the Rams starter, they are a top 10 option. Week in, week out, whoever's starting the game needs to be in your lineup. So I think he's a great player to target, especially if you have Kyren Williams. But even if you don't, I think it is justified. The upside is truly league winning if it happens at the right time. So the path for Corum to succeed is easy to imagine. It's just a question of, will it actually materialize in 2024? I think it's a decent bet to make in the 10th round or later, especially if you can get him later. You're looking at handcuffs no matter what. Corum is one of the most valuable in the NFL. And speaking of very valuable handcuff running backs, I have Zack Charbonnet in the exact same tier. I view him identically to Benson and Corum. And because he has the cheapest price of the 3, I draft him a lot. And he probably also has more weekly value. I think his role is bigger on a week-to-week basis. But I'm not convinced that he has top 5 upside like they do. He enters year 2 of his career as still just the backup to Kenneth Walker. Walker isn't going anywhere, but Charbonnet is very talented. He may not be the most talented at any single thing across the NFL, but he also has 0 weaknesses in his skill set. He's very solid across the board. And if he had been drafted this year, if he came out for the draft in 2024, I think he might have been drafted above Jonathan Brooks as the RB1. But he's 6 foot, 214 pounds with 4.53 speed. He also caught 33 receptions as a rookie. He definitely has a role in Seattle's offense, but they're pivoting to more of a pass-first approach. And if we look at his stats last season, in 3 games where Walker missed time or was just straight up ruled out, Charbonnet wasn't like elite with that opportunity. He posted 11.4 points per game on 19.7 touches per game. He caught 3.7 receptions per game, averaged 75 yards per game on 3.2 yards per carry. Really low efficiency. He also scored a touchdown, and he wasn't exceptional, but he wasn't bad at all. He was a fine flex play for the sake of his floor. You were fine if you started him. But it's also worth noting that his matchups were terrible. He faced the Rams, the 49ers, and the Cowboys, 3 of the toughest matchups in the NFL for the running back position, and that is definitely a factor. If it's a good matchup, he would probably put up top 12, top 10 numbers if Walker goes down again. But across 16 games, he only averaged 5.6 points per game on 8.8 touches per game. And if that repeats, he's not a guy you're like dying to put in your lineup. It's not someone you can feel confident will give you any real fantasy value on a weekly basis. So yeah, he's probably more involved weekly than Benson or Corum, but it's kind of irrelevant. But if Walker does go down, you probably will get that 19, 20 touches per game again. And that's definitely a great bet to make. Given he's a full round cheaper than Benson and Corum, I draft him a lot. So you're looking at league winning potential, especially if he's your flex play. You're in great shape if that happens, but it might not. It might be Charbonnet who goes down, and all of a sudden Kenneth Walker is a top 5 running back. So this is why these guys are risky, but there's also reward. The price isn't like too crazy, and at this point, you're not expecting a ton from these running backs. But I do think he's worth handcuffing if you have Walker, and he's worth targeting even if you don't as well. Last player in this video, at running back 40, I have Austin Ekeler, who just moved from LA to Washington. He now plays for the Commanders at the age of 29. And Ekeler signed a 2-year deal worth a total $8.4 million, but only 1 year of that is guaranteed. And he will be backing up Brian Robinson in Cliff Kingsbury's offense. I think that role is definitely the case for him. On the bright side, he is reuniting with Anthony Lynn, his former Chargers coach, and that is maybe going to work in his favor. But on the downside, he profiles as mainly just a pass catcher on a team with Jaden Daniels, a rookie quarterback who's much more likely to scramble and run it himself rather than check it down when the play breaks down. So unless it's designed for him to get the ball, I don't think it's going to happen that often. I think his role is definitely just the backup. If I'm wrong, if all of a sudden he does steal the majority of touches from Brian Robinson, not only on first and second down, but mainly on the goal line, then I'm going to be way too low in this ranking. Maybe he should be closer to like RB35. But I really only see a big role for fantasy for Ekeler this year if Brian Robinson gets hurt. And given he's much younger, I think it's more likely that Ekeler goes down than B-Rob. So he's okay. He's been an elite fantasy option in the past, but I just don't trust him moving forward. They're not committed to him long term, and I do think Brian Robinson is the guy you want. He also saw a major fall off in efficiency last year. He sprained his ankle early in the year, and when he came back from injury, he just did not look the same. He did not have the same burst. He is definitely on the tail end of his career. He's had a lot of innings pitched overall, but maybe he could work out. I think he's a fine investment now that he's fallen to round 12 consistently. I have him as my RB40, and his ADP is actually running back 41, pick 130 overall. But Charbonnet goes a few picks later, and I definitely prefer to draft Charbonnet, so I still don't draft Ekeler that much. If he falls to me at like pick 138, 140, then I'm like, all right, I'll settle on Ekeler. There's not much risk at that price. So he's a decent option, but not someone I'm targeting. I am more willing to take him if I already have Robinson and I'm like, all right, let's just monopolize this backfield. Or if I have Jaden Daniels and I'm looking to stack him up. He is going to catch some passes at the end of the day, but not a player I'm targeting. I think it's the end of the road for Ekeler in terms of weekly fantasy value. It's not a bet I want to make. So these are my top 40 running backs, a tiered breakdown of the position. And I've already broken down the top 30 previously. So let's just look at these last two tiers. I've got Jalen Warren, followed by Gus Edwards, Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears, Devin Singletary, and Javonte Williams, RBs 30 through 36. Some of these guys are not handcuffed. Some of them are starters, but they're mostly all in committees. And for the most part, I think they won't offer like league-winning value this season unless there are some major injuries or they score like double-digit touchdowns. It's kind of unlikely to hit. But these last four players in a tier of their own, I have Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Zack Charbonnet, and Austin Ekeler, along with a few other guys we'll mention in a later video, and they definitely have the potential for top 10 production if the starter does go down, but there's definitely a scenario where that doesn't happen for any of them. So those are my top 40 running backs. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button for me and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll be going live on Wednesday and Friday and Monday as I do every week, and I'll also be posting another video later on this week for the top 40 wide receiver rankings as well. So if you don't want to miss out, ring the notification bell and get updated whenever I post new content. And until then, I will see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.